Toronto-Tampa was some kind of theater on Saturday night in Toronto, and certainly the fallout from that loss is going to be felt for weeks, if not months. And to help us kind of navigate some of that, James Mirtle is dropping by the podcast here. And I know, James, you did the Leafs Report podcast on Sunday with Jonas Siegel, and I'm wondering what and I read Down Goes Brown's kind of two-person kind of breakdown of should they do this, should they not do that. I know there's a lot of emotions flying around Leafs land on this Monday. After you dropped that podcast, and I'm sure you've started to receive some feedback, like what's the feeling in Toronto? Is there a consensus feeling, or is it kind of all over the map, as kind of Down Goes Brown pointed out in his column today?
It's interesting. I think this year's kind of feels different in Toronto, where people are kind of just more sad than angry. They're not even mad at Dubas, or in previous years it was, fire everybody and all this stuff. And this year it's kind of just like, it feels like to the fan base that the Leafs did almost everything that they could. They just ran up against a really, really good team, and they lost by 1 goal in Game 7. And it's almost like an existential problem for the Leafs, and it's almost like they feel cursed, and they just, no matter what they do, 115-point season, 60-goal scorer, GM who makes a lot of great moves, and it still doesn't drop for them. And I think that's, if I had to sum it up, I mean, there's certainly people at different extremes and everything, but I think the overall feeling is kind of, as Down Goes Brown wrote in his piece, the kind of the way that his head feels about it is that this is a good team with a good management group and a good coach, and they fell just short. And that's not the way that it was in previous years.
So with that in mind, should that mean Brendan Shanahan, Kyle Dubas, and Sheldon Keefe don't have to worry about job security this offseason? They should be able to, a lot of people are saying, hey man, we're team run it back with the core. They should also expect those 3 guys to be back too?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the run it back philosophy is even more resting with kind of the front office, the vision, the trust the process, all that kind of stuff is what people are talking about with run it back, because there are going to be changes on the ice, right? Like it's not just with the salary cap, with all of the UFAs, the RFAs, with what's happening with their goaltending situation, there's going to be different players. So really, if you're saying run it back, you're really talking about Shanahan, the Shana plan, Dubas, Sheldon Keefe. I mean, I think that that's a core part of what people are talking about. And I'm seeing a lot more of that sentiment than fire everybody. The Leafs had a 115-point season. Do you know how many 115-point seasons there have been in NHL history? Not very many. There's a little more than 30 ever by any team. So, the Leafs did something that they've never done in franchise history. They exceeded their franchise best by a lot. They had players on the team that did things that had never been done before in franchise history, like Austin Matthews. They had a good season. And to blow it up over that, I bet you if you go down that list of the teams that have had 115-point seasons, I bet you no one fired the GM after those seasons.
Listen, you're talking to a guy who watched, I was in Ottawa. They finally get to the Stanley Cup final and they fired John Muckler. But that's another story for another day. I'm curious. I want to play a little audio here for our listeners here, because there was a comment that Sheldon Keefe made post-game Saturday, James, that has certainly gained a lot of traction. And that is the fact that, hey, like the handshake line felt different this year. So just want to go ahead and play that audio for our listeners. This is Sheldon Keefe post-game on Saturday.
We got a lot of respect in that line from their team, which is nice to see. It was a much different tone, a much different feeling of respect on the other side from what we've experienced previously. I think we're certainly earning respect in the league. But again, we're not in the respect game, we're in the winning game.
All right, James. So look, a lot of people were mocking that comment from Sheldon Keefe as if to say, like, oh, look, now they got respect in the handshake line. Like, what was your comment or your takeaway from that particular comment from Sheldon Keefe?
I actually read that as kind of a comment on what happened with Montreal on the handshake line last year, that with the story that was never told. Like the Canadians were throwing shade at the players or the coaching staff, and I don't know exactly what happened, but that was sort of what stood out to me about that comment. I don't think it was Sheldon Keefe patting himself or the team on the back necessarily, as it was. It's you know what it is almost, guys. It's like we didn't embarrass ourselves in this series, which they have previously. The Montreal series was an embarrassment for the Leafs. You're up 3-1. You're the heavily favored team. You've had this amazing regular season. You've won your first division title in decades. And then to do what they did, it was very embarrassing. So not only did they not get respect in the handshake line, they probably didn't earn it, right? So it's more like for one, I don't know what happened there, but I think what in the handshake line, what he's saying is that the Lightning said, you have an amazing team. It was really difficult to play against you guys, and you tested us right to our limits. And that's a team that's seen everything in the playoffs the last 2 years. And I think that that's really what he was talking about.
So to keep on Sheldon Keefe here, I know you've already kind of mentioned that maybe it doesn't really make sense to let him or some of the other big figureheads in the Leafs organization go. But there is an available coaching candidate, and I'm sure we all know the name Barry Trotz. We all know about his track record. We all know about what he's done as an NHL head coach. He's out there. What do you think about the idea that, maybe the Leafs should look into replacing Keefe with Barry Trotz?
Well, I think that they should look at everything and think about everything. I just think that if you commit to this management group, which I think they're going to, and which I think they should, they're going to want to bring Sheldon Keefe back. I think that's the bottom line, is that they're not going to want to make a change. So how much time should we spend on the Barry Trotz discussion with the Leafs? The interesting thing is, the coaches did a really good job with the Leafs this year. I mean, part of the reason why they had 115 points, I mean, the Leafs goaltending was a problem all year, especially their backup goaltending. They did not have a good save percentage. Jack Campbell had really struggled at periods in time. Despite that, they had a 115-point season. And how they did that was the coaching staff. They overhauled the coaching staff. They brought in 2 new assistants. They completely changed their penalty kill. They completely changed the power play. Their systems play, their defensive play was better this year than it's been in, again, decades in Toronto. That was Sheldon Keefe. Now, can you quibble with some of the things he did? Yeah. I mean, he leaned in and he was leaned in on toughness, which the Leafs don't have a lot of in the first couple games of the series. And that didn't really pan out well. And the other big thing, too, is that the power play was just not very good in the playoffs for the 3rd straight year under Sheldon Keefe. And that's certainly a black mark against him.
Well, it's funny you bring up the power play, James, because I think, obviously, when you think of the power play, you think of the big stars. And coming into this year's playoffs, there was a lot on Marner and Matthews. And they had to change the narrative. So another first-round exit, but they were Marner in particular was a little bit more productive at times in this series. Did Marner and Matthews shake the label, James, or do they still kind of carry around the postseason underachiever label?
I mean, they played well, even in that Game 7. I mean, they created the 1 goal. Do you want them to create more than 1 goal? Yeah. Do you want the power play to be better than 11% at 5-on-4? Yeah. But if you look overall at the series, that was by far their best line. And I would say that was the best line in the whole series, if you include Tampa or you include the Leafs. They really carried the mail there. And I think part of the reason the Leafs lost is they didn't get enough from their other lines. They only got 1 5-on-5 goal from their 3rd line. I believe they only got 1 5-on-5 goal from their 4th line. John Tavares and William Nylander for long stretches in the series weren't productive. So to put it on Marner and Matthews when they did deliver offensively, they did deliver the only offense they got in Game 7. The only place you'd want them to be better is on the power play. It's going to stick with them, Ian, just because they didn't win a playoff series, and I think that that's fair. But if you're going down the list of who to place blame on in this series for not winning, they're near the bottom of the list. Austin Matthews was their best player in the series. I mean, the bottom line, and Mitch Marner was probably right there with him.
Is there a big contract or someone on this Leafs team who the organization should consider moving on from this offseason?
Well, I mean, yes. Yeah. I mean, I think that the most complicated situations for them in terms of the cap are going to be, what do they do in goal? What do they do with Jack Campbell? There's not a lot of UFA goalies available. He's potentially going to be able to command a lot in free agency. He's on the wrong side of 30 next season. Do you want to give him term? Do you want to give him a lot of dollars? Is what you saw from him this year, where he was fantastic in the first half and then got injured and really fell off in the second half, and I think was decent in the playoffs. Do you want to commit term and dollars to that? Do you want to go another direction? There's not a lot of UFA goalies available that are really intriguing. They got Peter Mrazek as the backup, who they're going to have to try and find a way to disappear that $3.8 million contract. I think what they do in goal is going to be one of the big discussions of the offseason. And the other contract that I think that they could look at moving on from is Jake Muzzin, who's making 5.6, who's going to be 33 years old, who has slowed down, had a lot of injuries, and they've got some kids coming on the back end who are going to push him for minutes, Rasmus Sandin, Timothy Liljegren. So those are probably the big ones. And the other one, Ilya Mikheyev, is a UFA, and I just don't see any way they're going to be able to bring him back. So as I said, earlier on the show, that there's going to be changes in Toronto. The question is how big, like how much does the group change? If you change both your goalies and you trade Jake Muzzin and you lose Ilya Mikheyev, all of a sudden maybe that's not what we think of as the core in Toronto. That's not the big four or the big five, but it's pretty close. It's certainly like the next level of the core that's going to be changed.